Hello, welcome to this fieldwork introduction. We're looking at the sequence of inquiry for a GCSE project on the AQA specification. We're now looking at the sequence of inquiry. So the sequence of inquiry is the stages that you go through to collect some data and then present it. So number one is looking for a suitable question or hypothesis or even prediction. The evidence types, how you're going to collect it, and also the risks associated with that. Number two, we're going to select some data to collect. We're going to measure something. We're going to go out. We're going to maybe count something and record this data in different ways. Typically, that might be with a clipboard and a kind of a tally sheet, but sometimes it might be audio recordings. There's lots of different ways. Number three, we're going to select appropriate ways to process and present the data. So when we say process the data, we might be talking about statistical skills, using mode or median or other statistical skills. How we're going to present it. There's different types of graphs. Number four, we're then going to describe the data and analyze the data, maybe explain the data. Has that matched our initial question? Number five, we're going to look at the conclusions. So have we then proved or disproved the main question or hypothesis that we had at the very start? Number six, we're going to evaluate the success of what we've done. So if we did it again, what would we do differently to make the data more reliable? And can we rely upon the data? We're going to go into a few stages now, some different examples. So number one, looking at the risk and the questions. So choosing a question to look at, it needs to be an appropriate question. So at GCSE particularly, it needs to match in with the specification, something that we've studied. Of course, we need to stay safe when we're collecting the data. And ideally, it needs to be a place where it's accessible, it's easy to get to, so that we can collect the data, maybe even close by. We've got the risks, and when we've got the risks of the project, there's always risks when we go out of school, and we're going to mitigate those risks. And we do that by looking at the severity of the risk, which is the S, and then we're going to multiply that by the likelihood. So let's say, for example, there's a severe risk of injury and it's very likely to happen. Then we're going to have to put some mitigation strategies in place to make sure that risk doesn't happen. Next, we're looking at selecting and measuring recorded data in different ways. There's two different types of evidence. One's primary evidence, so that's evidence that you'll collect yourself. And you look at the information in front of you, look at the fieldwork site in front of you, whatever you're studying, and collect the information yourself, maybe on a clipboard or audio recordings, or even video or pictures. Secondary data, that's evidence that other people have collected. Now there's pros and cons for both of these. The positives of primary is you've seen it, you've been there, you've collected it yourself, you know that it's partially reliable because you're the person that has assessed it. The negative for that is it takes a long time, especially if you need to go back to a location that's not local to you. Secondary evidence, the positive of that is it's really easy to collect, so often it's just on websites, so maybe government websites. But the negative for that is often it's data that's collected for other purposes and you're using it for a purpose that you haven't intended and you don't know how it's been collected. Now at the bottom here we've got the different sampling techniques. Students who take statistics, they'll be familiar with these. So we have stratified sampling, random sampling and systematic sampling. So what is this about? This is about you cannot test every single piece of data. So let's say we're analysing houses on a 3-mile long street and we're looking at the difference, the quality of the houses or maybe the size of the houses. So we're not able to look at every single house. So which ones do we look at? Which ones do we sample? Stratified sampling is where we only look at where there's a big difference. So maybe where it changes from terraced houses to maybe semi-detached houses to maybe detached houses. So the stratified or the strata, the differences, we just change them. We could have a random number generator and do random sampling. Now the positives of that is there's no bias in there. The negatives of that is we might end up with all the houses at the start of the street or the end of the street, or we miss some of the distances. And then we have systematic sampling. So that's where you use some kind of system. So you may say there's 100 houses and we're going to sample 10 of them, so we're going to sample every 10th house. So that's systematic sampling. So there's positives and negatives for each one of these. Number 3, we're looking at selecting appropriate ways to process and present data. To process, maybe use some statistical methods like median, mode, mean, or some other way to find out central tendency. And then present the data in a suitable graph or bar chart or line chart. So processing data is all about using the numbers. Do you have a mean once you've collected your data and you might have 10 points? Do you use the mean or the mode or the median or some other way to find a central value? And then once you've got that, maybe you want to present it so it's more easy to interpret rather than a whole sheet of data. Maybe you've got 2 pieces of information. So on the top left here, we've got a scatter graph. So you're seeing the relationship between 2 pieces of information. On the top right, we've got a pie chart, so you're seeing the proportions of different values. And the bottom left, maybe you want to see changes over a period of time, so you'll have a line graph there. So there's different ways to present data. It depends on what you want from your data. Number 4, describing, analysing and explaining the fieldwork data results. So here we've collected the data, we've come back to the classroom, we've looked at it, we've analysed it, and we're now going to start talking about the graphs effectively. When we analyse, we're first going to describe, so just say what you see. Where are the increases? Where are the decreases? Where are the odd results, the anomalies? Then we're going to start to explain the findings. Can we give some reasons for the highest results and the lowest results? Can we give maybe a reason for the anomaly, the odd one out? So the analysis is trying to find out what's going on. In a sequence of inquiry, number 5, reaching conclusions. So have you proved your question to be correct or not correct, or have you proved your hypothesis to be correct or not correct? Firstly, go back to your original question. Did you answer the question if it was a format like that? Or if it was a hypothesis, whereas a prediction, you're going to say, was the prediction true or was the prediction false? It doesn't matter either way. Probably your prediction was partially true or maybe partially false. Or maybe if you collected 4 pieces of evidence, maybe 3 of them backed up the hypothesis, but maybe 1 didn't, and that's entirely fine. Number 6, evaluating the success of the data collection methods. So when we evaluate our project, our data collection methods, we're not talking about, yes, it was a good day out. We're thinking about the validity of the conclusions. Are the conclusions valid? Because on this sequence here, if you chose the wrong methods and you picked out the wrong data, that means your results were wrong. And if your results were wrong, then your analysis was wrong. And if your analysis was wrong, then your conclusion can't possibly be right. So is your conclusion valid? So maybe the methods, should you have chosen a different sampling technique? Should you have collected data in a different way? Should you have collected more pieces of data? Now, typically in most questions, when it says, can you improve the validity of your results? There's 2 things to write. One is collect more data, and the second one is collect it at different times of the day. Both of those things improve the amount of data you collected, which means your analysis and your conclusions are much more valid. Finally, the sequence of inquiry again. Number 1, get a question. Number 2, collect some data, record the data. Number 3, present the data and process the data. Number 4, describe and analyze the data. Number 5, reach a conclusion. And number 6, was your conclusion valid? So evaluate the validity of your conclusion. Should you have collected more data at different times of the day? Should you have collected more data at other times in the week? And maybe should you go back to it at other sections?